Hey everyone, just a quick heads up. There was some construction going on when we recorded this discussion. We didn't realize as we were recording how much some of those construction sounds bled into the audio background. You can hear everything we say clearly, but there was some hammering in the background that you will hear during parts of the discussion. So now you know what is there and why it's there. Enjoy the episode.
You're listening to Why We Do What We Do.
Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your symbolic host, Abraham.
And I'm your waving in the wind host, Shane.
We're a psychology podcast. We talk about all of the weird things that people do around the world in many cultures and in many different ways, but of a similar form, kind of.
Yes. Actually, this topic is one of those ones that people have been doing for many, many, many years, many decades, centuries even.
And have strong opinions about, too.
Yes, that's a way to put it. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, as I said, we talk about psychology things. If you would like to support the show, if you end up liking what you hear today and you have not already, then you should consider subscribing. You can tell a friend about us. You can join us on Patreon. You can pick up some merch. You can leave a rating and review, or you can sew a giant flag with WWD podcast on it and fly that baby high. Fly it proud.
That's it. Make it as big as possible, like one of those car dealerships that have giant American flags.
Exactly. And I'll talk more about the ways that you can support us at the end of this discussion. But I do want to note that we are currently running a campaign to try and increase our Patreon group. So if we can get up to 15 Patreon supporters, we are going to have a little hangout online with just our Patreon people. We'll talk, we'll chat, we'll have fun together, and you can consider joining us. And if we get up to even more, like 20, then we might do something even more fun, like a little trivia game or some other virtual thing that maybe we'll live stream like a private episode. We haven't decided yet. We'll figure out a thing.
Yeah.
But it'll be cool if we get up there. So consider joining us there, and you can get the benefits both of being a Patreon and of getting to hang out with us if that's something you want to do.
I hope you do. I mean, if you don't, then I would have so many questions, and that would be such a blow to my ego.
Which is so fragile already.
Right, hanging on by a thread.
Well, this episode is going to be published on, or is being published, you're hearing it now on the date that it's published, which is May 10th of the year 2023, and the May 10th comes with it some holidays for us to recognize.
Yes, so today is Donate a Day's Wages to Charity Day.
That's very generous.
Yeah, it says day too many times in there.
It's also National Receptionists Day, so be kind to our receptionists. Get them a gift.
Yes, save all the Pams and Pauls and whoever is a receptionist.
Yeah.
It's also Mother Ocean Day. Love that.
Sure. National Night Shift Workers Day. Appreciate those people who stay up late to keep everything floating and working the way it needs to.
Have you ever had a night shift job?
I have a couple of times. It
Horrible.
was brutal. Yeah.
It is rough. It is rough. It's also National Small Business Day, so please go support small businesses.
That's us.
Yeah, we are.
Also, Root Canal Appreciation Day. I don't know. I guess you can appreciate what it's trying to do. Appreciating the act itself seems a little tough. A tall order.
Yeah. They had to make a day for it because they were like, nobody appreciates this the way they should.
That's right.
And it's also World Lupus Day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. Usually it's like awareness. It's just Lupus Day. We're just like celebrating lupus.
Yeah, I was. That's when I looked it up. It was World Lupus Day.
Okay, great. It is Arson Awareness Week. So there is an awareness out there. And
yes.
It is of fire.
Yes. Be aware of fire. It is also Be Kind to Animals Week, which, gets the WWD stamp of approval.
Agreed. Yeah, that one lasts from now until May 10th of next year, I think.
Yes, and every year beyond that.
That's right. For the rest of time. It is also International Clitoris Awareness Week. So a thing to also know that is in existence.
Yes, and more people should. It's also National Children's Mental Health Week. Super important.
Yes, indeed. And just in case you forgot already, it is also Root Canal Appreciation Week. Still.
There's a day and a week. I just want to make sure that everybody is really clear about that. It's a whole day and then a whole ass week.
That's right. You get everything you need about root canal appreciation. One total package right there.
Yeah. I did look it up. May is not Root Canal Appreciation Month, though, so.
Missed opportunity.
That's it. One day.
Could have been holidays nested within like days, weeks, months. It would have been great.
What if this was like a misconstrued thing and there's like an actual canal that's like a really important canal for a community that's called Root Canal, and that's what it was, but dentists were like, they co-opted it. They totally took it and they're like, it's ours.
That's probably it. It was like a very important shipping route that every country on the planet used at some point or uses at some point, and it was Root Canal.
Yeah, and dentist appropriated it.
Yeah, the dentist took it, and now everyone's confused.
That's my favorite new lore. That's headcanon.
Well, if you are a vexillologist, you will either love or hate this episode. So welcome, vexillologists, amateur and professional among you.
What is a vexillologist? I had a hard time saying that myself.
That's a tough one. Vexillology is the scientific study of flags. So a vexillologist is one who then studies flags as their job, I guess, maybe hobby. I'm not sure.
One of my favorite things is that every time we get into a topic, like you discover that there's some field of study around a very specific thing. Like somebody had to put together this, like they were like, you know what, the study of this, the science of this, the research in this, like the degree that you get in this is vexillology. Now, welcome to that world.
Yeah. So there's so many people in the world that something like this can exist. And all that is to say that we are talking about, as I mentioned, flags. We're talking about flags, what they are and all of that. And I think it raises an important question. Why would a psychology podcast talk about flags?
Because they're everywhere, and they are interesting as a form of communication intended to convey some kind of meaning without knowing the language of the communicator. So they are like kind of a universal communication tool. They are imbued with symbolism in nearly every aspect of their design, whether it's shape, size, color, symbols, where it's flown, combinations of all those things, and super, super fascinating when you get into like how flags are used in those spaces.
Yeah. And furthermore, we're in the United States of America, the US of A, and flag culture in the US is particularly flamboyant, sometimes to the point of jingoism, and sometimes to the point of it being comical. But flags are a very big thing in the US.
Yes, and so this episode in particular is going to be a how-to, like how to read and interpret flags, as well as a why it do explanation, as well as a history of, and finally, here's some interesting stuff you may not have known type of discussion. So there's a lot to unpack here, but we're not going to talk your ear off.
Although there's kind of a lot of different things to talk about, they don't take a lot of time to talk about them. So I think this will probably be on a little bit of the shorter side. Although for us, who knows what that actually means? I know we can be a little long-winded.
Yes. We always find a way to turn a 30-minute episode into an hour and a half.
Yeah, at the end of every year, Spotify tells us we produced X percentage more content than the year before, and it just keeps going up. So apparently we like to talk.
Yeah, it's trending up.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get into the background of this. So some of the information that you need to have to know about flags. What is the history of flags? What do we know about where flags came from? And in the vast internet of knowledge, the best that I could find for the origin of flag is,
we don't know.
Yeah.
Most sources estimated thousands of years back that flags started, with the longest estimate being 11th century BCE in ancient China. That's as far as we've gotten so far.
But what's important about that is what even is a flag? And the definition is relevant because things that we now call flags likely and almost certainly evolved from other forms of signage, particularly things like a standard in a military formation, which was kind of just a cloth banner that hang down from a horizontal cross, or other signage things that people might have used.
Right. Although a flag is generally described as a piece of material, usually cloth, cut into a particular shape, containing images depicting various symbols, icons, colors, or other images, there are things that function as flags or were precursors to flags that were likely made out of materials including metal and wood. That would be really difficult to burn a metal flag.
It would be. It just melts. It doesn't do what you want it to in that case.
Not quite as showy.
Yeah. And furthermore, at this point, the symbolism of the flag is likely the most important part in really thinking about what a flag is conveying and what's on the flag, because you can now see flags depicted in many ways that don't involve cloth. So, for example, a flag might be painted onto a material. You might have a flag that's a sticker that goes on like a car or on a water bottle or whatever. You have flags that are tattoos that, of course, are then not made out of material unless you consider skin material. And if you do, then maybe turn yourself into the FBI.
Yeah.
or whatever law enforcement agency heads your country that investigates violent crime. Or, anything where we can see the colors or shape of the flag depicted in some way. Again, the material part is the actual flag, but if I were to say there's a flag on that car, you might still understand that that flag is a sticker or a painting or something of that nature, or a decal, and not necessarily an actual material flag that's mounted on it.
Sure, that makes sense. Because the origin of flag is uncertain, the reasons for its use are equally unknown. We don't really know where flag started as like a symbolic type of communication. But as we said at the beginning, generally, the primary purpose of the flag is to communicate, specifically without having to speak the language of the communicator or needing to be able to read. And so many flags do have text. We do recognize that. And it speaks to who the intended audience is for that message. But they can still be interpreted by somebody who doesn't speak the language, or at least they can understand that that flag is trying to communicate something.
Right. And you can imagine that predating things like other forms of communication, radio, Morse code, whatever it is, the only way that people could communicate at a distance was to use often some either very, very loud sound or some kind of visual medium, which has the benefit of potentially not being loud and attracting
right.
people to your position and that sort of thing. The flags then could be used to communicate. And as we said, it often did not have anything that was super fine detail like text. And you can also imagine that back at the time that flags were sort of starting to be used, that was way before literacy was going to be very widespread or even kind of common among most people. And so it really did need to be a symbolic representation anyway.
Absolutely. So many people believe that flags were likely used early on for ships at sea to signal one another. They might signal that they had a sick crew, to communicate the weather conditions, and to signal allegiance to one another so they wouldn't fire on one another. Although this would mean that if it was an enemy flag, they might be fired upon. So there was a lot of sea battles, and especially when you get into the pirate age and all the fun stuff that went along with that and all the symbology around flags. It's always really great to hear those stories, and we'll talk a little bit about that later.
Yeah, and then others also suggested that flags were used in combat and war, initially or early on, probably both to signal and coordinate troops, but also there's some amount of it that was sort of peacocking to just look like there was a lot going on. It's big and bright and flashy and colorful, and it adds to the mixture of numbers, so it can be kind of hard to tell exactly, and so it sort of gives a little bit more fanfare and is showy in that way. And then there was also probably general use for things that were like, if you imagine a lot of signage that people had that might have adorned shops, it might have adorned buildings, it might have adorned government, it might have adorned a lot of things that were either material like a cloth or other materials that were meant to be some kind of signage, and that those essentially just went from a fixed position on a thing like a building to essentially being mounted on a more portable thing like a stick or a pole.
Right.
And so that's kind of where they probably originated, is among those places.
I try to think of some examples of flags that I've seen that kind of had an impact on me in general, like when you think about the symbology of it and stuff. And the one thing I keep going back to is in Dune. Partly because I've been reading the Dune series, but the one vision that Paul keeps having is that as the Atreides start to expand across the universe, he sees the green flag of the Atreides on every planet. And so the idea, like, that was a big symbol of his kind of like his reign of terror as the emperor, and how that would apply. And it was never war and blood and da-da-da. I mean, that was part of it, but it was really kind of his big thing was seeing the flag of the Atreides on every planet in the Empire.
Interesting. I did not remember that detail of the flag specifically in those books, but
yeah, I mean, most people remember the worms. I mean, that's fair.
Yeah, the
worms are cooler.
Important.
Worms are cooler, but the flag kept coming back to me. I was like, oh yeah, that's like a kind of a pretty powerful symbol.
It's good to just remember the lore of Dune as we go forward, because it's just so good.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's addicted to worm poop. That's really what it is. Like that's the story of Dune,
and understandably so.
Yeah, worm poop makes space travel possible. That's what Dune is about.
Well, we should probably talk more about worm poop, but first we're going to listen to some worm poop, and that is ads.
Yes.
Okay, so we were just talking about worm poop, but what we were going to talk about is more about the history of flags and sort of the why of flags in some certain ways. Now, One thing that I was thinking about is why flags are made of a flexible material. Why not just have it be that you're holding up like a board, like a billboard that has a sign or a piece of metal or whatever. And I actually had a difficult time tracking down any concrete information about this, but particularly thinking about cloth in like weather, where you've got a lot of rain and that sort of thing, it makes it less resilient. But I think there were some very practical concerns that probably were involved in this. I just didn't find a lot of people talking about it. But one thing I did find, so was sort of alluded to, is that one of the things to consider is fabric is lightweight. So if you were trying to communicate a lot of information via signage, it would be a lot easier to mount that thing without having to really engineer a very sturdy pole or expect someone with very strong arms to hold it for a long period of time, because it just wouldn't weigh very much. So there's a very practical concern around like how tough your infrastructure needs to be to fly a flag. If it's very lightweight, then you can essentially make it relatively cheap and not that rigid of a structure.
And also just kind of thinking about the natural phenomenon that is wind, that would make it so that the flag can be seen periodically no matter what angle you're viewing it from. The wind will blow it in certain directions and make it facing, and really two directions at the same time if the flag is printed and created on both sides.
Right, yeah, exactly. So then if you can see it from one side, you can see it from the other, and then as it sort of moves around, it allows it to be seen from many people. You're exactly right. Anymore, flags are most popularly used to identify and represent a country. I think that one of the most common things people will know is that every country has a flag and nationalities, and there are also flags down to smaller municipal regions like states and cities, and they also belong to clubs and groups of people and that sort of thing. So they might represent a specific government or system of government. They might represent a very specific geographical region. They're used kind of as anything that can be some kind of logo or icon or representation about some almost always group of people in a particular setting, if you will.
Sure. Now, although flags are used for communication, or have been historically, they're used for other specific activities. So a person might use a flag to signal the start of a race, to indicate the winner at the end of the race, the checkered flag, which is like the flag of Daytona Beach.
Right.
To stake a claim on a newly explored area, which is why there's an American flag on the moon, supposedly, to indicate offsides in a soccer or a football game, and little flags in the grass to warn people not to walk, cut the grass, or dig in a particular area. So there's lots of uses, whether they're just giant big flags or like tiny little flags stuck in a yard over a cable.
Yeah, so you can imagine flags serve all kinds of purposes. And I was trying to, really trying to pull out examples of things where you wouldn't necessarily think of it as being a flag, but they are. Like they're functionally and topographically all examples of flags.
Yeah.
So essentially, flags can serve many purposes. They can be a form of decoration. People, as we said, use them as warnings. They obviously use for messaging and advertising, as well as signaling. And a lot of people use them to communicate some message, even when it's like a flag that is a national flag. How it's posted, where it's posted, all of that can actually have its own implications and meaning as people use it.
Absolutely. So, with that being said, I think it's important to recognize that there are different shapes of flags. We typically are familiar with the rectangular flag, which is often used for national flags and state flags and all that in the United States. But there are so many shapes. Like so many shapes.
There are a lot of shapes.
So just to kind of give a couple off the top of my head, and I don't know if you want to go over all of these, but some of these words are really fun. So there's a rectangular flag, a square flag, a pennant, a double pennant, a fanion, a burgee, a swallowtail and tongue, a gonfalon, a bunting, a flag with schwenkel, which I love. There's a ribbon, streamers, oriflammes, and windsocks, just to name a few.
Some that you might see outside of a business include a vertical flag, a curved vertical flag, or a feathered vertical flag. And the feathered ones are those ones that I feel like are like right outside H&R Block that are like, do your taxes today.
Yes.
Sort of thing. Those advertising, really common ones. But there's also just like, there's a bunch, there are these swallowtails, there's these pennants and double pennants and upside down pennants. There's one called the tampo, the curvy arc, swing. I mean, we're just giving you names, but essentially what a lot of these are is they're flags that have like points on them. So almost like they end in a bunch of triangles, or they have like V's cut out of the end of the flag. They also have ones that sort of curve downward, that look like a bird's beak, or they curve downward as a rectangle, so it's sort of a curvy rectangle, or they end in streamers. There's actually one that has a hole. A flag with a hole is what it's called. It just has a hole in the middle. So there's all kinds of different shapes that these flags take. There's tons of them, and they're used for different things.
It's actually pretty fascinating. I think the Raven banner is pretty interesting. It looks like kind of like a quarter circle, or it looks like kind of like how you would draw a sun in the corner of a piece of paper,
right?
Like as a child,
yeah.
You just draw the circle and then like the little beams from it. It looks like that. There's the shield, which is shaped like kind of like a medieval shield. And there's also two different types of rectangle. There's rectangular 1-to-2 ratio, and there's a rectangular 2-to-3 ratio.
There you go. And so, as I said, what's interesting about flags is that they are basically meant to be symbolic in every way. Like they represent something, they indicate something, they imply something. And so one of the things that is important about flags is understanding the position of the flag. One position of a flag can be to post it upside down. And this is actually... I'm curious if you were reacting to an upside down flag and what that might mean. But what you might not know is that the upside down flag officially is used as a signal of distress in many, many places. As a matter of fact, the U.S. flag code specifies that is the only acceptable condition under which to invert the flag to be upside down is to indicate distress. So like on a ship, for example, they might put their flag upside down, and that means like, please help us as a thing.
Right. Which made me think of flags that have very symmetrical designs. Like I think of the Japanese flag, which, you know, when you turn upside down is the same flag.
Right.
But that goes back to some places just don't have a meaning for an upside down flag. That's not part of like the code and decorum of that particular flag. So that made me think of that right away.
Yeah, there are a few that they can't be inverted either forward or backward or upside down or right side up because they're perfectly symmetrical, or they might be symmetrical in one way and not another. But yeah, you're right. They can't be inverted. Of course, many people are probably thinking, and they're not wrong, that an upside down flag can also mean like dissent. It can mean disapproval of their government, or that you are dissenting from the government in some way. And in some countries that do not have the freedom to criticize the government built into their constitution and their laws, flying an upside down flag may be a punishable offense because they don't have freedom there.
Yeah. Were you ever somebody who would fly or post an upside down flag?
No, mostly because I have had so few flags in my life that there would not have been an opportunity to do that.
I remember doing that when we went into the Iraqi war. And like kind of that whole thing when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. And I remember posting stuff on, it was like MySpace or something, causing a ruckus with my top 8 friends and all that. Yeah. So it was a whole thing. Now that was like kind of like a punk symbol, right? Like, so it's like the upside down flag was always something you saw at like punk shows and like, especially with political punk bands, like anti-flag. I'm pretty sure their whole thing is that they are like named after an upside down flag.
Yeah. Glad you mentioned anti-flag because I was not thinking about all the flag bands that we could talk about.
Yeah, black flag,
also black flag,
anti-flag. Yeah. Also, too, there's other symbols. There are other positionings, right, that mean different things. A flag at half-mast or half-staff is most often used to indicate mourning for someone, usually someone powerful or maybe some kind of major national tragedy.
Yeah, after someone's passed away. But yeah, as you said, a national tragedy or someone has died is a common time that'll happen. And I actually found that seems to be internationally fairly common.
Yeah.
Although it definitely is the case in the United States. It seems to be mostly if like a politician dies is when they'll go to half-mast.
Right.
Or someone who is like a public servant in some way, but almost never for someone who's just a celebrity. They would have to also be like a public servant in some way.
I did see, which was a wild thing to me, like Rush Limbaugh, like when he passed away, people were putting their flags at half-staff. And I was like, no, that's not right.
Double staff.
Yeah, to put it up higher.
We shouldn't celebrate the death of others, but half staff does seem like a bit of a stretch to me for a highly charged political figure.
Yes,
like talk show host. You know what I mean?
Yeah. That was kind of my thought. My general thought on that.
Like I wouldn't fly a flag at half-mast if Joe Rogan were to pass away suddenly.
No.
Yeah,
that's the equivalent, I think.
Yeah. Now, an American flag will be displayed backward. And what I mean by backward is that if you look at American flag, if you're those of you not familiar with it, on the way that it's designed is on the top left corner is a blue rectangle with a bunch of white stars in it, and then it's red and white stripes from top to bottom. And if you were to flip that so that on the right top is the star, so it's not upside down, but it is now switched so it's facing the other direction. That actually is something that people do on purpose in the government. And so it's displayed in that backward manner on the passenger side of cars which in most of the world means the right side of the car if you were driving in it. But in some places where people drive on the right side of the car, then it would not, the passenger side would not be. Anyway, point being, passenger side for people who drive on the left side of the road.
Okay.
Where the driver's seat is on the left side of the car.
Sure.
It's also on the right sleeve of military uniforms. It is shown backwards. And it's actually, this is considered a sign of loyalty and respect. And it's because with an object like a car or someone's shoulder, the forward motion of the object, where they want the stars to come first, so the stars would be forward. They sort of made the argument that there is no upper left because it's on the right shoulder, which I don't fully understand their logic there. But anyway, the point being they want the stars to come forward. So if you're moving forward, then the stars are in the front. And it also should look like what the flag would look like if you were seeing it from both sides. So if you imagine like the car being transparent, if you have it facing the right direction on the driver's side door, and then if you were to view it from the other, just flipped around, then the stars would then be on the right, if that makes sense. And the same is true for the flag on the sleeves of uniforms. Is that if you were to see it from the left, on the left, if the person was transparent and all you saw was the flag, on the other side of them, the stars would be on the right. And so there's a whole thing about this being the official position that's considered loyalty and respect to fly the flag, to have the flag posted backward when it's meant to be on the right side of a thing.
Interesting. My educated guess would have been that you put the stars forward because if I'm running forward, that's how the flag would fly if I were holding the flag up, right?
Yeah.
So like it would fly with the bars, or, the stripes facing backwards or pointing backwards.
I think that is kind of what that means by putting the stars forward, is that there indicates the forward motion of it. If that makes sense. So I think you're right. Yeah.
Well, we have been talking about colors on the flag, so it's probably worth diving into that a little bit because I feel like colors, and we already did an episode on like color psychology and all that, which I think is, if it's not necessarily related to this, but it might be a fun listen to kind of dive into. But we know that part of the communication of flags is the color of the flag, the color on the imprint, or the symbolism within each color. I mean, we know in the United States we've got the red, white, and blue. The red and white are supposed to be the original 13 colonies, not necessarily the colors being used as symbolism, but the stripes themselves being the symbol.
Right. Okay, so a lot of times the colors that are chosen, like they're often meant, depending on the situation, like there's a high level of contrast people might want to show. And so often like the most common meanings are the ones that are going to get the most vibrant, most contrasted colors because they're the easiest to discern. And so common colors that you're going to see on flags are black, white, red, blue, green, yellow, and orange. And then the different combinations of colors can mean things, because there are, of course, those aren't the only colors you can see. You might also see purple and other colors, but those are the very common ones anyway. And so we'll just sort of talk through what those different colors mean when they're depicted, and then what different combinations might mean as well.
Right. So I think the first one that might come up is the black flag. And this can mean a couple different things. It can mean determination. It can mean ethnic heritage. It can mean defeat of the enemies. It can mean symbols of death or mourning. That tracks with a lot of kind of like symbolism around the color black in general.
Yeah. In addition, people are probably familiar with that. A black flag can be some sort of sign of anarchism, anti-government sentiment, that sort of thing. Although apparently, and you might have known this, but I didn't know this, a black flag is used to summon a race car driver who's on a race car track to come and stop at the pit stop for quick maintenance. Yeah. So you could be anti-government or pro-race car, or maybe both at the same time.
Yeah, anti-government or pro-new tires.
Exactly.
All right, so the white color of a flag is often used as maybe a possible surrender. If you're in battle, you kind of see that a lot. When people say throwing in the towel, they usually throw in a white towel to give up or surrender, like in a fight or something like that. The color white is often used as a symbol of peace. Historically, it's been used to describe purity, harmony, things like that. As a matter of fact, Stephen King uses the color white as the example of good in his world, and the color red is actually evil. Like if something is of the red, they are usually of the evil side, and of the white means that they are of the pure good side.
All right, I can see that. Yeah, it seems like a lot of places have sort of adopted white to have a similar meaning. Red is super common. You're going to see this in a lot of flags, and red, as you might imagine, has a lot to do with indicating some amount of like war or blood. It can also indicate a sense of power. Revolution is a very common one, so you'll see that in a lot of places. So red is meant to be sort of this aggressive-ish color, although it's not meant to indicate the nation is aggressive. It often is just could be saying something like this flag, this nation, this government was forged from overcoming a wartime history. And so there are a lot of meanings that could be indicated in that. Like there was one where the government, I believe that they gained their independence and they adopted a red stripe in the middle of their flag to essentially indicate the lives lost as in the fight for their independence. So it's not meant to be an aggressive thing in that sense. It was meant to sort of honor those who served in the revolution for their independence.
Sure. I think that makes sense. When I think of the color red as like a predominant color on a flag, I immediately think of the Soviet Union.
It's understandable.
Well, yeah. You know, there's a whole history with that. But I think even more so than that, thinking about how some of the propaganda and some of the discussions around the nation itself was about power and strength.
Yeah.
And it made sense that that was like kind of like the primary template for the entire flag.
Yeah, absolutely.
The color blue, which is a personal favorite of mine, is usually related to liberation. I like the idea that it's related to good fortune.
Yeah.
That's kind of a nice thing. There's some other people that will say that it stands for, let's say, determination, like maybe the country is determined, they have persevered, which actually tracks a lot with American history and kind of like getting out from under British rule. So it makes sense that you've got that kind of like that swath of blue on the United States flag, and liberation as well as part of that.
Yeah.
And then alertness, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, liberty is very common with the blue color, although it has also been used to indicate things like open ocean and sky. So for example, there are some island nations that have a blue flag, and then there's sort of a color icon in the center. I actually just say like one that was interesting to me is a place called St. Lucia, which has as their flag, it's an all sort of sky blue flag. And it has this black triangle that's actually meant to represent sort of the indigenous people that are there. It's got this gold triangle that's meant to represent some of the sunlight and the warmth and the fact that this is like a place with warm and sunny.
Yeah.
And then it kind of has this image of this triangle in this blue field that sort of looks like an island in the middle of water. So there's a lot of symbolism wrapped up in it that I think was kind of really thoughtful in how it was put together.
That reminds me, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more later, but the flag for the state of Florida is actually pretty thoughtful. It's white and it's got like kind of like some red bars on it and a seal in the middle, and it's got some imagery of somebody standing in kind of like the swampy like woodlands of Florida. So it looks like kind of old Florida, and has somebody who's an indigenous person in it, which is like kind of ironic. I'm surprised Ron DeSantis hasn't tried to change it.
Yeah.
But fascinating. It's the only flag in the United States that has an exposed breast on it.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah. So Florida's wild. So anyway, back to colors. The color green is usually in reference to something that has to do with like fertility, which makes sense. You can see that with like land fertility and growth. You see that with agriculture in places that have like maybe a large agriculture industry. It can be used as youthfulness. It could be used for hope. It could be used as prosperity. It could be used as a few different things like that. But it seems to make sense that it would be something related to the land and growth in that space.
Yep. And yellow, there's sort of yellow and orange, I think are obviously somewhat similar colors, but yellow has been viewed as it can represent the sun, it can represent wealth and energy, it can also represent happiness. There's sort of this way that yellow is depicted, that sort of sense of things. And then orange can be a representation of courage and sacrifice, sort of a blending of the red in there a little bit. You might be wondering how you might combine all of those colors to depict a specific message. But first, the canker sore of the media world advertisement. Okay, so we were talking about the different colors that might be on flags and what those could mean, but there's also very common combinations of colors that you'll see, and so we'll address those right now. And one of the first ones that you might be thinking about is red, white, and blue.
Yeah, you didn't say that right, though. It's not red, white, and blue. It's red, white, and blue.
Sorry, I missed the appropriate inflection.
It happens. So many Americans actually kind of look at this idea, this combination as our own. It's unique. We did this thing. We created this, which, I think is kind of common for many Americans to think that we did this thing first when we are an incredibly new nation.
Yeah.
People don't realize that kind of in the history of the world. But this blend has been existent well before the United States and has actually been found in a lot of European countries. And just to name a few, Croatia, Czech Republic, France, Netherlands, Serbia, the UK, and Slovenia. you see it's kind of already existed. And this combination is usually a way to represent, we mentioned it before, liberty. We talked about representative government. We talked about independence. Those are typically, you'll find those colors in those spaces, which is ironic given that Russia is also red, white, and blue right now.
Oh, I didn't know that they were red, white, and blue right now.
Mm-hmm.
Figured it was still red with the hammer and sickle.
Nope, it's red, white, and blue, but the bars are horizontal.
Weird. Okay. Green, red, and yellow color combinations you might see in some African countries, Congo, Ghana, Guinea, Mali. There's lots of places that you're going to see that combination of colors, but there are also many places around the world that include green, red, and yellow. We also see the green, red is very common, as well as white and black. So you see that those four colors together in a lot of the Muslim countries. So you'll see that in United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Palestine, Syria, I think Iraq, Afghanistan, the countries in the Middle East that have a Muslim faith will often use the red, white, green, and black colors. One other color that you'll sometimes see on flags, not as common, is purple. And that really is just meant to represent like royalty, wealth, that sort of thing. So if you see purple flags, that often indicates like a monarchy or a kingdom of some sort.
You know, it's funny that you bring that up. I cannot for the life of me think of a flag for a nation right now that has the color purple on it. Like, I can think of all the other colors. I can think of those in one way or another, but I cannot think of purple.
Oh, only 3 national flags: Dominica, El Salvador, and Nicaragua.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Use purple in their flags. So
interesting. What you'll find is like every flag that is flown, at least for nations specifically, and that's kind of what we're talking about, probably has like some very unique symbology or history behind why those colors were selected for that particular flag.
Yeah, exactly.
So many of the colors that are put on the flag represent a country's former relation to another nation. What you'll find is that, like, when a country has been colonized and takes back its independence, it might adopt the colors of the colonizing nation's flag, as was the case of the original American flags. The United Kingdom's flag was red, white, and blue. It's the Union Jack. And then so we did that, take that, and we applied that. Fun fact, Betsy Ross was apparently the first person who designed the first American flag that had the 13 stars with the stars, the circle of the stars. Everybody knows about Betsy Ross?
I heard that, and then I heard that there was some dispute about the veracity of that claim. I didn't actually look it up for this episode, so I'm not 100% clear on that one. There might be some people who argue against that.
That's fine. They can argue against it. I'm going to say I'm for it because I am directly related to Betsy Ross.
It's reasonable.
Yeah. It's in my family is all I'm saying. Like, you're welcome for the American flag is what I'm saying.
Let's see. The white flag of surrender, which we talked about a little bit, that goes back at least as far as the Roman Empire. China also was flying white flags around a similar time, so it's not clear who did it first. It's possible this was sort of a convergent thing that both arrived at that. Now, China's they used in battle, they would actually lead their armies with white flags, but as a flag of surrender, it was most likely started in the Roman Empire, as far as we can tell. And then it was used by British forces during the Revolutionary War in the United States. They used the white flag in combination with a drum cadence that was meant to indicate a request for parley, because they were surrendering at the siege of Yorktown, Virginia.
Hell yeah, they were. Sorry.
That may have been. Southern just came right out of shape.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was the first instance in sort of modern times. Probably not. But anyway, the Geneva Convention actually officially recognizes the white flag as a symbol of surrender. And because of that, there are some specific rules around this, which is that it's illegal to pretend to surrender and then use that as a way to ambush your attacker. And it's also illegal to continue to fire on someone who has raised a white flag. So I've always thought it was a little bit weird to have wartime laws, but I also get like why there are wartime laws, because people will do terrible things.
People will do horrible things. Yes.
Anyway, that's it. That is the thing, is the white flag is a sign of surrender. It has been for a very long time and is officially recognized as such.
Fascinating. It's one of those things, you may have entered this episode not thinking that flags were super interesting, but I think that they're really, really cool, and for these types of reasons.
So there's some other interesting things I found about flags that I thought would just be fun to share. They didn't fit super neatly into like a particular topic, but there are some things that I found. One thing that I found was that the oldest state flag is Denmark's flag from the 13th century. So obviously flags have been around longer than that, but this is the longest one that seems to be has been unchanged since then. I mean, it's just a red flag with a white sideways cross that is obviously meant to indicate some religious background with the government at the time that was developed.
That makes sense. There also seems to be ongoing competitions to break the world record for the largest flag, and the largest flag flown in the world as of 2022 was 2,554.31 square meters, as far as we can tell, because we are in the imperial system, as you can see by our flag, or 27,494 square feet, 13 square inches. So about, what you said, 5 square miles?
Yeah, about that.
5 miles. That's way too big a flag.
That is very, very large. That was created and flown in Egypt, and I think it was specifically to break the world record. The first Pride flag was flown in San Francisco on June 25th, 1978. I was looking up all the different Pride flags because I was going to list them, but there are at least 22 of them.
Wow.
And they represent various aspects of gender, sexual orientation, and intersectionality of those things with different backgrounds. And so there's just a lot of representation in the different flags that mean different things in the LGBTQIA plus community.
I love it. There's also the black flag with the skull and 2 crossed swords, also known as the Jolly Roger. It was actually used by pirates and was meant to symbolize both that they adhered to no country's rules and that they might do anything in a fight or to plunder another's boat. Interesting, though, there are lots of different symbols that you might find on pirate flags. So there's like red skeletons, there's a skull with crossed bones, there's a skull with a bone underneath it. Sometimes there's hearts, sometimes they're red and yellow, sometimes there's an arm with a sword on it. And sometimes there's an actual hourglass, and they all mean different things, which are really, really cool. Sometimes, too, as a matter of fact, because pirates don't obey any laws or rules, they would capture different ships, and they would take those countries' flags and fly them depending on who they were encountering, and then be like, surprise, gotcha, and then be a pirate, and then capture that flag. So...
Yes, I heard about that as well. I actually did see that the skull and crossbones was not actually the Jolly Roger. That came to be known as the Jolly Roger, but originally it seemed to just be referred to the pirate flags in general.
Yeah,
was some information that I had. So,
and I just found a list. And this is something, pirates always fascinate me because there's just pirates in Florida apparently, and my favorite baseball team is the Pittsburgh Pirates. But the skull meant death. A red skeleton meant they were particularly violent. A skeleton with horns meant the devil. Dripping blood meant a slow, painful death. Weapons like swords, spears, daggers were violence and a pirate's willingness to fight. The hourglass, sometimes with wings, meant that time was running out or flying away. Death is near. So a lot of them just mean like you're going to die if you see them. Initials referred to the captain or to his enemies. Raised glasses meant a toast to death or to the devil. A clothed figure meant that it represented the pirate's captain, and a naked figure meant that it was the pirate's lack of shame.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot. The scope of pirate flags was beyond what I originally anticipated.
Yeah, so fun. I just loved it. It was like different symbols for like, yeah, you're going to die. You're going to die in different ways, but you're going to die.
Yes, basically. For those of us in the United States who are listening to us from the southern part of the country, you'll probably recognize the name Gadsden flag. But for those people who are unfamiliar with it, this is a flag with a snake on it that says, "Don't tread on me." Mm-hmm. Now, this was developed early in the country's history as an anti-British, pro-U.S. government flag that was developed leading up to the Revolutionary War. And at the time, as a note, part of the reason that there was a snake on it is at the time there was just a lot of snake symbolism being used in various aspects of things, including multiple flags that were intended to do the same thing that didn't get as much popularity, because I think people liked the coiled snake that was a rattlesnake, and they also liked the short phrase, "Don't tread on me." So that one gained in popularity, but otherwise, snake iconography was very common at the time.
That's a pretty powerful image. I mean, you see it, and it's like, you know it right away.
Yeah.
The Nepal flag is the only flag that is not quadrilateral. It's actually a double pennant, which is super interesting. So it's like 2 triangles.
It's 2 triangles, yeah, exactly right. It's a cool-looking flag, but it's the only one that is not a rectangle. There have been, up to what I was able to find, at least 27 versions of the U.S. flag. Now, most of them were some combination of stars and stripes. Like, that's been the overwhelming theme. And those are in various patterns, including 3 different iterations where the stars in the blue part of the flag are arranged to be a star made out of stars. So a bunch of stars
it's a lot.
lined up to make a larger star. That happened 3 different times at least. There was one with an eagle with a bunch of stars around it in the blue part of the flag, or a circle or concentric circles made out of stars. And one of the most original, and this is one of the things that we were talking about earlier, is not only did we adopt the red, white, and blue from the Union Jack British flag, but one of the first American flags was the Stars and Stripes, but with the Union Jack where the blue field now is. So we actually had the British flag inside the American flag. And again, that corresponds to the originating country of where the American colonists came from.
Yeah, I think my favorite looking at these is the Great Star because it's just a pentagram in the blue field.
There is a pentagram.
Yeah,
star.
it's not a pentagram. It's an upside down star. Like the top point is on the bottom. So it's but there's one that's like the star is like kind of off center. It's called the Great Flower design.
Yeah.
It's like tilted.
There are some countries that have stars on them where the stars are in a very specific constellation. Like I know there's one that has a constellation. It's a country in the southern hemisphere, and you can only see this constellation from the southern hemisphere. Well, it looks really cool on the flag, but they depict the stars in different sizes on the flag to represent the brightness of the stars in that constellation. So some of the stars are bigger than others on that constellation on the flag, which I thought was kind of a cool artistic choice.
Yeah, and there are some states that have constellations. My first thought was that California's flag had a constellation. It does not. It does have a star, but it has a bear on it. So I was like, oh yeah, it's got Ursa Major on it. It might have at one point in time, but it does not now. It just has a big bear.
Yeah, which you could imagine was a constellation if you wanted to.
Yeah, you could. You could think of it as a constellation.
We do need to talk about some more rules and regulations and laws and things about flags on boats. But first, we need to listen to some ads on boats. All right, we're back. We're talking about the International Maritime Flag Laws.
Yes, so there is an international maritime flag system that was created in Britain. Surprised that a country that is known for colonizing so many countries has created a thing that they're like, everybody's going to use this.
Right.
But it has been in place for over 150 years. And the system uses square flags of different colors to represent different letters and 10 pennants of different colors to represent numbers. And so the flags are used in accommodation to signal other ships. For instance, the flag for O is divided by a diagonal line from the left top to the bottom right, the right corner, with red on top and yellow on the bottom. And that symbol means that somebody's gone overboard.
Yep. Some of them means like we're in a distress. Some of them means like we have people who are in the water diving, like don't come near because we don't want you to hit them or anything. And so there's lots of these different symbols. And actually a couple of the flags are cut into the swallowtail sort of sign, although it's with a square flag. But yeah, they represent the different letters of the alphabet. Then there's the pennants that represent different numbers, and a lot of these are actually meant to communicate back and forth. Like one of these flags just means yes, and another one just means no. And so they'll basically raise these flags to communicate to one another as a way of giving some amount of communication if there's not another way to do it.
And they only use 5 colors. They're only white, blue, red, yellow, and black.
No purple.
There's no purple. There's no orange. They're very stark, very clear symbols when you see them.
Yeah, and actually the ones that are often used for the most like important distress scene, like this is need to get your attention right away, are the ones with the most vibrant, most easily contrasted colors that are very easy to see. Very little detail, like monochromatic.
Yes.
It's just you need to be able to understand it at a glance what's going on.
Absolutely.
All right. I think that's mostly what I have to say about flags. Anything that I missed or anything we need to add to talk about flags?
I don't have anything else. I think it's super fascinating. I think it's worth being able to see kind of maybe if you live in a place where there are multiple flags that represent where you're at, I think it's actually pretty cool for you to kind of explore the history, why that flag was developed that way and where it came from, because it might give you some insight on why a flag has like a bear on it or a booby.
That's right. Go join a vexillology club. Go find some other flag enthusiasts and learn all about the flags that are out there. Fly your freak flag high, as they say.
Yeah, we didn't even cover freak flags.
I don't really have a lot for take-homes. I just think I'm not someone who's ever been super enthusiastic about flags, but what I really appreciate is the symbolic nature of it. The fact that they are meant to be communicative to a large audience very easily, I think is interesting and kind of cool. So I thought it was worth spending some time exploring some flags.
Absolutely, I agree.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that is all that we have before we get to some recommendations. But first, I would like to do my thank yous, the people who help make this podcast possible. If you would like to join us and support us, then you can head on over to Patreon. There you'll get access to, if you join us on Patreon, you'll get access to things like early episodes, unedited episodes, videos, our notes. And then if we come up with random content that we like to post, then that sometimes will go out. Like if we talk to ChatGPT and ask it to help us explain a concept, ChatGPT notes will often make their way to Patreon. And this episode in particular, we used a ton of pictures in our notes. It doesn't help very much in an audio medium, but if you're getting our notes, then you get to see those things. So anyway, head on over to Patreon, help us get to our goal of 15 so we can hang out with people. And it'll be a jolly old time over there.
That's what I'm saying.
And exactly. And there are already people who have done that thing, and we really appreciate them, all of their continued support and the help that they have allowed us to continue to do this show as long as they have. And that includes Mike M, Megan, Layla, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, the Daily BA, Brad, Stephanie, Kelly, Olivia, and Brian. Thank you all so much for your support.
Yes, we appreciate you so much.
Well, perfect. Let's go ahead and talk about some recommendations, and then we'll get out of here.
Absolutely. Recommendations. So mine is a comic series. I am, as a child of the 90s, I am a huge Ninja Turtle fan.
I understand.
It is something that I was absolutely obsessed with for a very long time, to the point where my parents talk about how obsessed I was, and I still have all of my action figures from when I was a kid.
Wow.
Like all of the originals. It's a sickness. It's a problem is what I'm saying. But in the last few years, they have kind of revitalized the comic series through IDW Publishing, and the comic series has been really great. They recently put out a storyline called The Last Ronin. Have you heard of this yet?
I saw the 47 Ronin movie. That was not that great.
Different story.
Yeah.
So in this one, it's set in a like a post-apocalyptic future, kind of, where the Foot Clan have taken over New York City, and there is only one Ninja Turtle left, and you're left to guess who it is, because they use all of the weapons, because all the other three turtles are dead.
Oh my gosh.
And they wear a black mask, and so that's the story. It's like, it's really dark and really kind of like it's a very adult story. It's incredible, though, and it takes some twists and turns that you're not prepared for. It's heart-wrenching and ends with some really interesting kind of advancements that go along with the Ninja Turtle series. So they just did, it was supposed to be like a one-series thing, but they turned it into a new, the way it ended up with a sequel series, which is going to be really cool.
Ooh, that sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and the art is great, and it's interesting watching a grizzled Ninja Turtle just, like, beat the crap out of everybody.
A grizzled turtle?
Uh-huh. Yeah, grizzled turtle, which is like an odd thing to think about.
Grizzly turtle, maybe.
Oh, and it was written by one of the original. I believe it was written by Kevin Eastman, who was one of the original creators of the Ninja Turtles.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
I am recommending a podcast. I've listened to just a little bit of this one, but we got to be in touch with the host of this podcast a little bit, and I think it's worth checking out for many people. If you're interested in psychology and other psychology related things, this is definitely worth checking out. This is called Meredith for Real, the Curious Introvert Podcast. Should be available, as far as I know, on all the sort of regular podcast streaming platforms. Similar to us, covers a wide variety of topics, tends to have, it seems like, a guest come on and who's sort of an expert in the thing, and then share their experiences and sort of talk somewhat candidly about that. And looks like the similar format, hour-ish long sort of episodes, and they'll do a deep dive. One of the more recent ones I know was on ADHD and meditation. So you can sort of skim through and look at what kind of content stands out to you, or just subscribe and follow along. But a podcast worth all y'all checking out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Meredith has been a wonderful to chat with. I got to chat with her on our Instagram page. So
cool. Awesome. All right. Very good. Well, I definitely need to give credit where credit is due. Music and editing by Justin Greenhouse. Writing and fact-checking by Shane, Selena, Jess, and myself. And thank you all, of course, for listening to this episode today. As I said, you can subscribe, leave a rating and a review, talk about us to your friends, that sort of thing. Helps us all out. Is there anything that I missed before we wrap up, Shane?
Nope.
Perfect, then. And I think that we are done. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.